We've done hundreds and hundreds of interviews in this studio, and many of them were done by tonight's guest. Steve Bacon has a new book. It's his 8th. So he's on that side of the studio while yours truly gets to grill him about his latest. The book is John Turner, an intimate biography of Canada's 17th Prime Minister. And it's a truly revealing look at his life and quest for the highest office in the land. Hey, Steve.
Hi.
Welcome back from your vacation.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for holding the fort while I've been away.
Been trying. Excellent read.
Thank you.
I have to admit that I didn't really know very much about Mr. Turner, but I kind of want to go back to September 2020 because that's when he passed.
Yeah.
And when he passed, the Globe and Mail's headline read, former Prime Minister John Turner, who was in office for just 11 weeks, dies aged 91. Mm-hmm. But weren't his accomplishments much more than that?
Totally, which is why so many of his friends were so furious when they read that headline, as if to suggest that because he was the second shortest-serving prime minister in Canadian history, that's the one thing that the Globe and Mail chose to highlight that day as a result. So many people were upset by that. Mm-hmm. John Turner is a fascinating figure and so much more than just that brief period of time when he was prime minister, because he did get to the top of the mountain, but he also had so many terrible things happen to him in public life as well. Mm-hmm. He was, John F. Kennedy becomes president in 61. He gets elected in 62. And he's our JFK. He is our,
He's very good looking.
Oh, my gosh.
Is that wrong to say?
Not
that was one of the things that people noticed about him.
He was a great looking guy. He was, he was 32, I think, when he first got elected. So he's sort of the Pied Piper of the new generation of Canadians who are starting to feel their political power at the time, and had a career that just had so many high highs and so many low lows that when you look back at the story, I think it is a unique story in Canadian politics, which is why I wanted to write about it.
And we're going to get more into those details. But, whenever I get a book, I don't know if you do the same thing. I usually read the acknowledgments first.
No.
That's what I do.
I start at the beginning and then go to the end.
I always do the acknowledgments because I try to get a peek into what the author was thinking about when they were writing the book. And in it, you mentioned that you did get permission from his wife, Jill, and you said that there might be some things in this book that she might not be very happy with. So how much cooperation did you get from the family? How did you go around about writing this book?
Well, there have been other books about John Turner in the past, but none of them has had the cooperation of the family in the way that this one did. I'm pleased to say. They were extremely helpful. Mrs. Turner, who I guess is about 83 now and lives 5 minutes from the studio, she was just remarkably helpful in family archives, in pictures. That picture, she took that picture on the cover of the book. I probably emailed her 100 times over the past couple of years, following up on fact checks because she's really good on that. And she sat down for a couple of very long interviews with me as well, which was very helpful. She had a very tempestuous relationship with the press when her husband was prime minister. So the fact that she would open herself up to another journalist, I found surprising and wonderful. And Mr. Turner's had some tragedy in his life. One of his children died.
Well, you're kind of getting ahead of the story.
Yeah, well, I only raised that to say that his surviving children also spoke to me as well. So the 3 surviving kids of the 4 also spoke to me. And again, that is something that other books have not featured.
Well, you mentioned that one of her children died. Yeah. And this is something that Mrs. Turner had in common with John's mother, Mr. Yes. Turner's mother. She lost her husband, his father, young, and she also lost a son. And Mrs. Turner lost her son maybe a year after Mr. Turner died during the COVID time. Not even a
few months.
When we talk about his early life, how did that help shape him for the more difficult aspects of public life?
This is a wonderful thing to ponder because, of course, my impression would have been that as a guy who grew up without a father, right, his father died when he was maybe 2, how could that not have but had a huge impact on his life? But then I remember talking to his sister, Brenda, who is now, I guess, about 90 or 91, still living in Montreal. And she said, you got to remember, during our formative years, it was World War II.
So a lot of the fathers were
Nobody had fathers, exactly. Everybody's father was away at war. So in some respects, of course, the fact that he never had a father had an impact on his life. But on the other hand, everybody else's dad was away as well. Now, their dads came home, his never did.
And in the book, you write this great story.
I shouldn't say that. Some of their dads came home. Obviously, we lost a lot of people during World War II. So some dads came home.
Well, you write this great story about how his mother, Phyllis, ended up in Canada, where her career really thrived. What effect did that have on young John's future?
Well, she was a superstar. She turned out to be the highest-ranking female public servant in Canada at the time. She had a very big job in the public service, and it opened doors for John in a way that, well, put it this way. If she were meeting with some bigwig, a big important person at the Chateau Laurier Hotel in Ottawa, she'd bring her kids along.
Can you tell the story about how when she came to Canada, when she got that job interview, she was told not to bring her kids? And
That's exactly right, and she did it anyway. That's right. They were living in England. Her husband died. Her child died. She moved to British Columbia to be back with her parents and basically start her life all over again. She wrote to Ottawa asking the Prime Minister of the day, I think R.B. Bennett, for a job. And somebody from his office said, sure, come to Ottawa, we'll give you a job interview. Don't bring the kids. She brought the kids.
And she got the job.
And she got the job, and the kids became pretty big deals in Ottawa as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned Mr. Turner's Kennedy appeal. A lot of people did compare him because he had, the body, he had the face.
He was an Olympic-level athlete.
Yes, he was the fastest man at one point in Canada, right?
Yeah.
When he walked into a room, he commanded that room. And there were rumors about him having a relationship with Princess Margaret. We've got a picture here. This is of Mr. Turner and Princess Margaret. Steve, did that benefit him or not? How he looked?
Well, it certainly did at the beginning, right? I mean, the media coverage, that's obviously later in the game, but his stepfather was Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia. And so when a much younger Princess Margaret decided to come over to visit British Columbia, the idea was, John, you're going to chaperone the princess around while she's over here on her visit. And of course, tons of coverage in the press about that. And unceasing questions for Mr. Turner for the rest of his life as to what happened between the two of them. And I've got some stories in the book that I think say more about what the nature of their relationship was like than anybody's had before, and I'm not giving it up here.
But no, you got to read it. It's very, juicy?
Yeah, it's juicy. Yeah, that's a good word. Juicy is good.
And going back to that headline about him just being in Prime Minister for X amount of days, it kind of underscored the importance of Mr. Turner as Justice Minister under Pierre Trudeau. He took on criminal code reform that saw abortion and homosexuality decriminalized. He was also a staunch Catholic. How did he reconcile the two?
Wonderful question. And he just seemed to have an understanding that while as a Catholic, he could never abide abortion, as a Catholic, homosexuality would have been difficult for him. But as a minister of the Crown, with responsibilities to the population as a whole, he somehow found a way not to allow his personal beliefs affect what he was required to do on the job. And it's interesting, Prime Minister Trudeau, the current Prime Minister's father, was Justice Minister before him in the Pearson government. And he couldn't get those reforms through. Now, in fairness, it was a minority parliament at the time, but Pierre Trudeau, as Justice Minister, couldn't get those reforms through. John Turner takes over as Pierre Trudeau's Justice Minister, and he was able to do so. Admittedly, a majority government, but he also knew Parliament and loved Parliament.
What do you mean by that?
He had relationships on all sides of the House. He frequently, when he wanted to get a bill passed, would bring his opposition critics into a meeting with him, and he'd say, look, here's what I want to do. You tell me what you need so you can get this through your caucus, so I can get your support. I'm prepared to make these changes. It was a more collaborative style of government. And as a result, I think he got stuff through, like the reforms you just talked about, that others could not and did not do.
I want to tell a quick story about Tommy Douglas, because this book covers a period of time where things are very different from how they are now.
Yes.
And you write about Tommy Douglas and how he was once named by the greatest Canadian by the CBC. And you mentioned that people didn't know his stance on that issue, that particular issue. How did you approach writing a book for today's audience with stuff that happened back in history that people might be like, well, that's wrong?
The quote you're referring to came out of the 1968 federal election leaders debate, in which the reforms that Mr. Turner put forward on decriminalizing homosexuality and abortion were a subject, obviously, of the debate. It was the most controversial issue in the country at the time. And Tommy Douglas said, we can't take a criminal approach to these issues. We need to take a mental health approach. It's not behavior that ought to be criminalized. It's behavior that ought to be treated as a mental illness, homosexuality. Now, that's more than 50 years ago. Those views obviously do not stand up to the test of time, but that's what progressive people believed more than 50 years ago. And there are numerous examples throughout the book of, we're going through this all the time now, right? Where things that were said 50 years ago just don't really meet the test of time anymore, even among saints like Tommy Douglas.
Well, we mentioned that Turner spent 79 days as prime minister. What would you say was his downfall?
A whole bunch of things. Number one, he'd been in the private sector for 10 years when he decided to come out of political retirement and go back into public life to replace Pierre Trudeau. And the Liberals had been in power for too long at that point. And, there was I remember it well, it's 38 years ago, but there was a feeling in the land that the Liberals had been in for too long and they needed replacing. So number one, he's coming in at the end of a long Liberal reign and, people are ready for a change. Number two, he had the misfortune to go up against one of the truly gifted politicians in Canadian history in Brian Mulroney. The guy was good. I mean, you say what you want about his policies, the guy was good. Back-to-back majority governments, first guy since Sir John A. Macdonald for the Conservatives to do that. Mr. Turner was very rusty. We have to be honest about that. When he came back out of retirement, it wasn't very good. He didn't know the issues very well. His French was rusty. His political antennae were not as sharp as they once were when he was sort of the boy wonder justice minister and the youngest finance minister in 100 years before that. So
did he lack confidence at that point?
That was another thing as well. Yeah, for sure. There was that moment, I guess, after he became prime minister, or I guess on the verge of his becoming prime minister, when he sort of shared with his sister this notion that, Brenda, can I really do this? Am I really good enough to do this? And I remember her telling me, how can you say this? I mean, if you don't think you can do this, why are you doing this? She almost tried to buck him up at the time. Anyway, yeah, so there's a whole bunch of things. That's a theme throughout his life, right? That's a theme throughout his life. He's the boy wonder in so many circumstances, but does he actually have the self-confidence to pull this off?
What would you, because, when he walked into the room, everyone's like, wow, people wanted to be around him. Yeah. Why was he so insecure? Did how he looked work against him?
There is a tendency to assume that people who are gorgeous have no brains, right? That is a kind of a reverse discrimination. And he suffered from that. You got to remember, this was a guy who was not only gorgeous, but as you pointed out, fastest man in the country at the time, Olympic-level athlete. He had a bit of a jock personality. Funny thing is, he was a Rhodes Scholar. Pierre Trudeau was not. And yet people constantly looked at Pierre Trudeau as the brilliant intellectual, and John Turner as this sort of jockish guy whose intellect was overrated. And in fact, they were different kinds of guys, but John Turner was no slouch. I mean, the guy was every bit as intellectual in his own way as Pierre Trudeau was. I think that's fair to say.
I have a picture here. I want to show it.
Sure.
And if you can tell us the story behind this picture.
Oh, my gosh. That was one of the most unfortunate moments in...
Can you describe the picture?
Yeah, sure. This is John Turner giving a speech at, I forget, one of those luncheon clubs, might have been the Empire Club, Canadian Club, I forget. And it's a picture of two forks coming out of his head, which is the logo of the organization sponsoring this. And for whatever reason, the photographer who took this picture decided to line it up in just such a way so that the forks emerge from Mr. Turner's head, making him look, frankly, like the devil. And he's got a look on his face that's sort of intense, like he's in the middle of making a very important point. And this is late, I think, in the '84 campaign, where things are going badly, and he's about to suffer an excruciating defeat as it is. And in the last week of the campaign, the Globe publishes this picture, which really felt like dirty pool. And we find out after the fact that the guy who took that picture became Brian Mulroney's official photographer. So you got to wonder what was going on there.
You mentioned in the book how Mr. Turner loved birthday parties.
Yes.
And he had this huge event for his 90th. And Mrs. Turner didn't really want to go to the party. She ended up not going.
Right.
And one of the reasons why she didn't go was because the people that would be there, former rivals, former politicians, the media.
Yep.
Would you say that Mr. Turner took a lot of criticism from the media? Was it fair?
Yes. A lot of it was fair because he wasn't as good as he needed to be at the time. I talked about how rusty he was when he came out of private life to go back into public life in 1984. I talked about how he seemed to, at the drop of a hat, repudiate long-standing Liberal Party policy. You know, like there was no more fervent champion of official bilingualism than Pierre Trudeau. And John Turner was taking over, and one of the first questions he got asked at his first press conference was, what's your view of bilingualism as it relates to an issue in Manitoba at the moment? And his view was, well, the provinces are responsible for that, so they can take care of that. Oh my goodness, that's not Liberal Party policy. So one of the problems, Nam, was that John Turner was this fair-haired knight in waiting for 10 years in the private sector. People were waiting. When it came time for Pierre Trudeau to retire, they saw John Turner as this, you know, knight in shining armor, as the guy waiting to come back in. And when he came back in and showed how not up on the issues he was, how his French wasn't so good.
And he was bilingual at one point.
Oh, he went to university in France.
Yeah.
His French was perfect once upon a time. Studied in Quebec, worked as a lawyer in Quebec. Just a lot of people thought, remember that old Walter Mondale expression? You know, where's the beef? You know, it wasn't there.
Well, let's talk about rivals, because
Sure.
One thing I learned reading this book is that I don't know if you can call people friends when you're a politician. They're more like allies or frenemies sometimes. But I'm going to show you some pictures, and if you can describe the pictures for us.
Great picture. Love this.
What was the state of affairs between Turner and Pierre Trudeau, and what are we looking at right now?
Okay, this is a picture in the middle. That's Lester Pearson, who was prime minister from 1963 to 1968, only minority governments, and he is surrounded by Pierre Trudeau, who would succeed him, John Turner, who would succeed Trudeau, and Jean Chrétien, who would succeed Turner as Liberal leader. And you got 4 prime ministers in one picture. They were all in the same cabinet once upon a time. That's a pretty, that's a murderer's row of political success in this country. And while Pearson never really had tremendous success as prime minister, he lost massively to John Diefenbaker in his first attempt to become prime minister, he did have what is widely perceived to be one of the most effective governments, even though only 5 years long, over the course of Canadian history. And again, gave birth to the political careers of those other 3 gentlemen.
The little gems that you have in the book are great, because you even tell a story of when Brian Mulroney, I think, was in his 20s, and then he met Mr. Turner in his 30s. And Brian Mulroney was like, oh my gosh, this guy's great. But I want to read a quote from the book. Brian Mulroney, after sparring with Turner on the free trade agreement in the 1988 election debate, reflected on this. To have taken the abuse and disloyalty from his own party after so many years of service was a profoundly unfair thing for John Turner and his wife and family to endure, Mulroney wrote in his memoir. And there he was in front of me in the studio in great pain, but still soldiering on in spite of it all. He struck me as a gallant warrior and worthy opponent. What was their relationship like, Mr. Mulroney?
Very interesting. Although, because Mulroney beat Turner in 2 consecutive elections, and there was obviously during the course of a campaign a lot of headbanging, people assumed that they didn't like each other. Not true. They both were lawyers in Quebec in the 1960s at the same time, 50s and 60s. And as a result, and there's 10 years difference. Turner's 10 years older. And as a result, Mulroney comes up in a culture in Quebec where Turner is sort of the superstar. And Mulroney, when he's an assistant to one of the Conservative cabinet ministers in the Diefenbaker government, sees John Turner on Parliament Hill at the dining room and says to the guy he's with, come on, let's go over and meet this guy. And his buddy says, but he's a Liberal. What do we want to talk to him for? And Brian Mulroney says, because he's going to be prime minister someday and we want to meet him. So the two had a mutual respect that started as young lawyers and continued all the way through their life together, both in Parliament and then after they both got out of politics. And there's a real affection between the two.
There's a really nice story of how Mr. Mulroney was looking out for Mr. Turner after he stepped down, and he was going through a difficult time. I want to go to the final one, Jean Chrétien and Mr. Turner, excuse me. What was their rivalry about?
I think it was best described by Jean Chrétien at that 90th birthday party you talked about that was held for John Turner a few years ago on Parliament Hill, in which Jean Chrétien said, we were both Liberal MPs, justice ministers, finance ministers, both in the same cabinet, both worked for Trudeau, both became leaders of the party, and God just decided that we were meant to be rivals. We both wanted the same job at the same time. Now remember, 1984, Turner comes out of private life, runs for the Liberal leadership. Who is he running against? Jean Chrétien. He's number 2 at that convention. But as the party president famously said, number 2 on the ballot, but number 1 in our hearts. Started a rivalry between the two of them that lasted. They actually got along fairly well when they were both cabinet ministers for Trudeau. But their rivalry was just so intense. And of course, the minute John Turner won the Liberal leadership in '84, all the people supporting Chrétien, I mean, they sharpened the knives the next day. And it's just, that's the way it goes. When two people want the same job at the same time, they're just not going to be friends.
Well, thinking about everything, all the obstacles that people go through, and Mr. Turner throughout the book, he really believed that people should serve, and he wanted people to serve to make this country the place that it is.
Yeah.
We haven't had that many prime ministers, but in the book you detail how this country treats former prime ministers. How are prime ministers and politicians treated once out of office in Canada?
I don't know if this is what you were setting up here, but this always comes to mind when I hear about this. I remember being at a Toronto Symphony Orchestra concert one night. The concert's over. Mr. Turner loved the TSO, and he had tickets. He frequently went. And here he is in his late 80s, emerging from this concert. And, you know, he's got a walker, I think, at this point. He had terrible back problems. That was the reference in the '88 leaders debate. John Turner in pain. Terrible back problems. And he can't get a cab. This is a guy who's a former prime minister of the country. He can't get a cab. And eventually I saw him and I went over to him and said, Mr. Turner, let me help you, get yourself a taxi. And I did, and on he went. I talked to lots of other people who had the same situation happen to them. One of Brian Mulroney's kids did it as well, leaving an event downtown Toronto. I think it was Mark Mulroney, who went up to him and said, Mr. Turner, let me help you get a cab. You know, these guys, even though they're ex-prime ministers, they're still on duty in many respects. They still get invitations all the time to represent. And
because I found it upsetting reading it, just imagining him on the side of the road trying to hail a cab.
Yeah.
When you compare to, say, the U.S.,
There's
how
no
does the
comparison.
U.S. treat their former
Oh my
presidents?
God, there's no comparison. First of all, the American presidents get a $250,000 pension for life, Secret Service protection for the rest of their lives, taxpayer money helping to fund usually their museums or whatever they call them, the centers where they have their archives and so on. We do none of that here. We do none of that. In fact, it's the Canadian tradition that as soon as the person is no longer prime minister, you stop calling them prime minister. Once you've been president of the United States, you're Mr. President for life.
You do tell that funny story about Sarah Palin.
Oh, yeah.
But read the book to find out what
true.
you said.
I won't give that one up here.
We only have a few minutes left. John Turner was guided by his strong belief, as I mentioned, in democracy and public discourse. We've got a clip of him giving a brief talk at Idea City in 2001.
Oh, okay.
And that was a decade after he left office. Let's take a look.
There's not enough public debate in Canada. There's no debate in Parliament. There's little debate in the universities and academia. The media aren't that hot either. I see Michael Bate from Frank Magazine is going to follow us today. That will be instructive. And I just want to assure Michael that despite what his editors think, this is a coffee, not a glass of scotch.
He looks very relaxed, no notes.
What I love about this, here's a guy who's in his 70s there and just goes out on the stage in front of a group of young people and just riffs for 20 minutes, not a note, talks to them about the importance of serving in public office, doesn't matter what office it is, from school board to prime minister, the importance of doing that democracy, he always used to say, democracy is too important not to participate. You've got to participate in democracy for it to work. And Moses Znaimer, who was running that show, who you used to work for him at City TV. Okay, he's a pretty hard guy to impress.
He's very laid back,
He's very laid back and very hard to impress. After that speech was over, he dashed onto the stage to hug John Turner because he was so moved by what Mr. Turner had to say.
Well, you talk a little bit about this in the book, of how much politics has changed. How did Mr. Turner look at politics of today compared to the more, I guess, collegial days in Ottawa?
Hated the politics of personal destruction that he constantly saw today. Understood that back in his day, you could be with different political parties, but still have friends on the other side of the aisle, and there was nothing inconsistent about that. Nobody would consider you disloyal if you were, seen having lunch with somebody in the other party, or sat beside somebody on a flight. Nowadays, there seem to be loyalty tests all the time. You don't want to be seen in public talking to somebody from one of the other parties. So no, he truly disliked the kind of hateful tinge of so much of politics today. He really, really disliked it a lot.
What would you say his legacy will be?
That's a hard question because, you know, he was prime minister for such a short period of time that you can't point to anything in particular in his prime ministerial time to say, thanks to him, we got that. Certainly as justice minister, the reforms we talked about earlier. As finance minister, a successful finance minister during times not unlike this, where we had terrible inflation and high unemployment as well. And he was the guy with his hand on the tiller, giving the public, I think, the confidence that John Turner as finance minister would get us through this. And for the most part, he did. I happen to think that one of his greatest contributions will be to democracy itself.
What do you mean?
This is one of the reasons I wanted to write this book. I think one of the best things he did well after he was out of public life. In fact, you know, he stopped being an MP in 1992, and some of the best stuff he ever did was in 2000, 2010, 2020. He'd go to high schools and he'd give speeches to high school kids about the importance of democracy. He led a 500-person overseeing the Ukrainian election mission 15 years ago to make sure there was no chicanery going on in that election campaign. Gave up his Christmas away from his family, which as a staunch Catholic was very important to him to be with his family at that time. No, he went overseas and led a Ukrainian delegation to oversee that election. He cared so much about democracy and, you know, what I mentioned a moment ago, the importance of everybody participating in democracy and how Parliament was kind of the beacon of freedom and democracy in Canada where all that happened. He had such respect and reverence for Parliament that we've really lost, and it'd be nice to get that back.
And he also, I think in the book you say that he knew every Canadian by name. I don't know if that...
That was his boast, that he could go down the main street of any big city in this country and more people would know him than any other person in the country. And I think that was right. I think that's right.
Terrific work, Steve,
Thank
as
you.
usual.
Great to chat with you again.
It's been fun. I hope I did okay.
Seems the only time you and I talk to each other is when I got a book. Otherwise, we're never on the same set together.
I need another book, 2 weeks. Thanks, Steve.
Okay.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.